Welcome to a world where power was as deadly as a dagger's blade. Imagine standing in the heart of ancient Rome, where emperors once ruled with absolute authority, their word law and their presence godlike. But behind the towering marble columns, beneath the gleaming golden crowns, lurked danger. A danger so real, so close, that no emperor could trust even his closest allies. In this story, we will explore the brutal truth about how some of Rome's most powerful rulers met their end, not by old age or illness, but by the cold, calculating hands of betrayal and assassination. The Roman Empire was a place of grandeur and glory, but also of treachery and bloodshed. It was an empire built on conquest, politics, and relentless ambition, an empire where today's friend could be tomorrow's murderer. The purple robe of the emperor was not just a symbol of prestige, it was a cloak weighed down by paranoia and the constant threat of death. From the very start, the throne of Rome was soaked in blood. The first emperor to face this deadly game would set the pattern for centuries of intrigue, conspiracy, and murder. His name was Julius Caesar, a man whose rise to power was legendary, and whose fall would echo through history as the most infamous assassination of them all. But Caesar was only the beginning. As Rome expanded, so too did the shadows around its rulers. Caligula, Claudius, Nero, Commodus. Each emperor carried a secret weight. Behind their grandeur, behind their empire, lurked enemies waiting for the right moment to strike. Some were killed by trusted guards, others poisoned by those closest to them. Some died on the Senate floor, stabbed to death by conspirators hiding in plain sight. Why were these emperors assassinated? Was it a fight for justice? Or was it simply the ruthless pursuit of power? The truth is complex. Each story is tangled with ambition, paranoia, loyalty, and betrayal. Each death reveals the fragile nature of power in ancient Rome. A throne built on shifting alliances and deadly plots. Over the course of this journey, we will uncover how these emperors lived, ruled, and ultimately died, victims of their own ambition and the dangerous world they controlled. We will step into the shadows of imperial Rome, to witness the dark side of its glory and the human cost of its power. So, fasten your seatbelt and prepare to step back in time. Because in Rome, the price of the crown was often a bloody death. So, fasten your seatbelt and prepare to step back in time. Because in Rome, the price of the crown was often a bloody death. Our first story begins not with an emperor, but with a man who changed Rome forever, Julius Caesar. Though technically, never an emperor himself, Caesar was the man who ended the Roman Republic and paved the way for imperial rule. And his assassination in 44 BC would become the most infamous political murder in history. A brutal warning that no one, no matter how powerful, was safe in Rome. Caesar was a military genius, a brilliant politician, and a man of immense charisma. He conquered Gaul, expanded Rome's territories, and won the hearts of the Roman people. But his ambition threatened the very foundations of the Republic. Many senators feared he was becoming too powerful, too much like a king, a title the Romans despised after centuries of rejecting monarchy. On the Ides of March 15th, in the year 44 BC, Julius Caesar walked into the Senate house, unaware that his fate was sealed. The air was thick with tension. A group of around 60 conspirators, led by Gaius Cassius Longinus and Marcus Junius Brutus, waited for their moment. These men were senators, friends, allies, even protégés, who had sworn to protect the Republic but were now ready to kill its most famous leader. As Caesar took his seat on the Senate bench, the conspirators closed in. What followed was a swift and savage attack. Caesar was stabbed 23 times. His famous last words, "Et tu, Brute," are said to have been spoken when he saw Brutus, whom he trusted like a son, among the attackers. Though historians debate the exact words, the betrayal was undeniable and brutal. The murder of Julius Caesar was not just a personal vendetta, it was a desperate political act. The senators believed that by killing Caesar, they could restore the Republic and end his growing dictatorship. Instead, their actions plunged Rome into chaos. Civil war erupted, and the dream of the Republic died. Caesar's assassination marked the start of a new era, one defined by even more ruthless power struggles, violent coups, and emperors who ruled with absolute authority but lived under constant threat of death. His legacy was a bloody warning. In Rome, power came at a price, and no one could sit on the throne safely. After Caesar, the throne of Rome would be claimed by his adopted heir, Octavian, later known as Augustus, the first official Roman emperor. Augustus knew the dangers of power all too well. He worked carefully to appear as the restorer of the Republic, masking his absolute control behind layers of diplomacy and tradition. Yet even his long and stable reign did not end the threat of assassination. Throughout the imperial period, the shadow of Caesar's murder loomed large. Emperors were constantly reminded that their power was fragile, and enemies lurked everywhere. Some emperors tried to buy loyalty with wealth and spectacle, others with fear and brutality. Still, many met violent ends. Caligula, known for his cruelty and madness, was assassinated by members of his own Praetorian Guard after just 4 years on the throne. Claudius was rumored to have been poisoned by his wife Agrippina, who wanted her son Nero to rule. Nero himself faced rebellion, and ultimately took his own life to avoid execution. The story of Roman emperors is a story of constant danger. The very seat of power was often the deadliest place to be. Assassinations were not anomalies. They were part of the brutal rhythm of Roman politics. Each killing was a message, a shift in power, and often the beginning of further violence. Whether it was by poison slipped into a cup, a blade hidden in a cloak, or a secret meeting in the dark, the end of an emperor was rarely peaceful. So as we move forward, remember Julius Caesar's fate. His death set the pattern for centuries to come, a deadly dance of ambition, betrayal, and the ultimate price of ruling the greatest empire the world had ever seen. The story of Rome's assassinated emperors is a window into the dark heart of power, where trust was rare, loyalty was a weapon, and the crown was both a prize and a curse. Stay with me, because next we will step deeper into this dangerous world, exploring the lives and violent deaths of emperors who dared to wear the purple, and how their assassinations changed the course of history forever. After the brutal assassination of Julius Caesar, the Roman Empire entered a new era, one where the throne was no longer just a seat of power, but a deadly game of survival. The empire's most notorious emperor, Caligula, would soon show just how perilous this throne could be. Born Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus in 12 AD, Caligula was the great-grandson of Julius Caesar and the son of the beloved General Germanicus. He earned the nickname Caligula, meaning little boot, from the soldiers who adored him as a child. At first, the young prince seemed destined for greatness. When he became emperor in 37 AD, Rome celebrated the end of Tiberius's gloomy reign and welcomed a new leader filled with promise. But the early hopes quickly faded. Caligula's reign would soon be marked by tales of madness, cruelty, and excess that have echoed through history. Ancient historians described him as unpredictable and terrifying, a ruler who oscillated between charm and sheer brutality. The reasons behind Caligula's descent into madness remain debated. Some suggest illness, others poison, or the pressures of absolute power. Whatever the cause, his behavior alienated senators, nobles, and even his own guards. He demanded worship as a living god, humiliated powerful families, and lavished extravagant gifts on himself, while ignoring Rome's pressing problems. His actions sowed fear and hatred across the empire. senators whispered behind closed doors. The Praetorian Guard, tasked with protecting the emperor, grew restless. The very men meant to safeguard his life began plotting his demise. In January 41st AD, after just 4 years of rule, Caligula's nightmare ended violently. On a fateful day in the imperial palace, Caligula was attacked by members of the Praetorian Guard led by Cassius Chaerea, a tribune who had long resented the emperor's insults and humiliations. The assassination was swift and merciless. Caligula was stabbed multiple times in the corridors of the palace, his screams echoing through the marble halls. His wife and daughter were also killed to prevent any chance of revenge or succession. Caligula's assassination sent shockwaves through Rome. His death was a brutal reminder that the emperor's throne was as dangerous as it was coveted. But it also showed the limits of imperial power. When the ruler lost the support of the Praetorian Guard and the elite, his reign could end overnight, violently and without mercy. The aftermath was chaotic. Caligula's uncle, Claudius, was unexpectedly declared emperor by the same Praetorian Guard that had killed Caligula. Claudius, considered weak and disabled by many, proved surprisingly shrewd and survived the deadly currents of Roman politics. But the shadow of Caligula's violent end loomed over his reign, a cautionary tale of the perils of absolute power unchecked. Caligula's death revealed a brutal truth. The throne of Rome was a throne of blood. The emperor was not invincible. No matter the power or title, the sword of assassination hung over every ruler. The same palace walls that echoed with the emperor's commands could also witness his screams as conspirators struck. This pattern would repeat again and again throughout Roman history. Emperors ruled with both awe and terror, knowing their lives could end at any moment by betrayal, murder, or rebellion. Caligula's assassination became a dark legend, a symbol of madness brought to justice by those who dared to strike back. It reminded Rome that even the most divine ruler was still a mortal man, vulnerable to the deadly ambitions of those around him. So as we continue this journey through Rome's bloody history, remember Caligula's fate. It was a warning to all emperors who followed: rule wisely, or face the wrath of those you betray. Next, we will explore the story of Claudius, a man who rose from the shadows to claim the throne after Caligula's fall, only to meet his own mysterious and deadly end. After the brutal murder of Caligula, the palace halls were in chaos. Blood still fresh on the marble floors. Fear still thick in the air. The empire stood on the edge of uncertainty. But as conspirators scrambled to flee and senators debated the future of Rome, a strange sound echoed from one of the palace chambers. The shallow breath of a man hiding behind a curtain. It was Claudius. He had spent most of his life in the background. Lame, stuttering, awkward, Claudius was dismissed by his family as a harmless fool. For years he was kept out of politics, mocked by nobles, and overlooked by the very machine of Roman power. But in a twist of fate, it was this invisibility that saved his life. After Caligula's assassination, members of the Praetorian Guard discovered Claudius cowering behind a tapestry. Instead of killing him, they knelt. In that moment, Claudius, the man no one expected, the man everyone ignored, became emperor. At first, the Senate was furious. They wanted to restore the Republic, not crown another Caesar. But the Praetorian Guard had spoken, and with their swords drawn, no one dared challenge their decision. Claudius was declared the new ruler of Rome in 41 AD. What followed was one of the most surprising reigns in Roman history. Despite his unassuming image, Claudius proved to be intelligent, capable, and even cunning. He expanded the empire, bringing Britain under Roman control. He improved the bureaucracy, reformed the legal system, and restored stability after Caligula's madness. He surrounded himself with skilled advisors and worked to legitimize his rule. But even as he brought order to the empire, danger still lurked behind the throne. His personal life was a storm of political marriages and betrayals. He married 4 times, each union more tangled in ambition than affection. But it was his final wife, Agrippina the Younger, who would seal his fate. Agrippina was not just another noblewoman. She was the great-granddaughter of Augustus, sister of Caligula, and mother to a boy named Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, better known to history as Nero. She was intelligent, manipulative, and fiercely ambitious. When she married Claudius, it was not for love, it was for power, and for her son. Claudius adopted Nero, placing him ahead of his own biological son Britannicus in the line of succession. Whether by persuasion or pressure, Agrippina succeeded in shaping the future of the empire. But Claudius was beginning to regret his decision. By the end of his reign, whispers filled the palace. Claudius had grown suspicious of Agrippina. Rumors suggest he considered removing Nero from succession and favoring Britannicus instead. Agrippina, always watching, could not allow that. In 54 AD, during a banquet, Claudius was served a plate of mushrooms, his favorite dish. What he didn't know was that one of those mushrooms had been laced with poison. Some say it was a swift-acting toxin. Others believe it took several hours, maybe even days, to fully take hold. Ancient sources are conflicted, but one thing is certain. Claudius died under mysterious circumstances. Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio, the great historians of Rome, all pointed fingers at Agrippina. According to legend, when Claudius began to recover, she ordered a physician to finish the job, slipping a poisoned feather down his throat under the pretense of helping him vomit. The emperor, who had survived ridicule, conspiracies, and palace politics, died quietly, murdered not by senators or soldiers, but likely by the woman who shared his bed. His stepson Nero became emperor the very same day. Claudius's death marked a chilling evolution in Roman politics. Assassination had moved from the Senate chamber and the battlefield into the home. The knife had become subtler, the poison more precise, and betrayal more personal than ever before. And while Claudius may not have inspired the same fear or hatred as his predecessor, he learned too late that power in Rome was never safe. Not from enemies, and certainly not from family. His reign was one of reform and achievement, but his death reminded everyone in Rome that the empire devoured its own. Even the quietest, most unlikely emperor was not spared the blade, even if it came dipped in wine and hidden in a mushroom. In the next chapter of this deadly tale, we turn to the one who inherited that poisoned throne, Nero, the boy emperor, whose name would become a byword for tyranny, madness, and the fiery downfall of everything Claudius had built. But before Nero burned the city, before he descended into madness, he was simply a young man with a crown, and a legacy soaked in betrayal. He was just 16 years old when the weight of the Roman Empire was placed on his shoulders. A teenager crowned as emperor, a boy ruling over legions, provinces, and a city that believed itself to be the heart of the world. His name was Nero. To the people of Rome, he was the heir to a new golden age. He was young, cultured, charming, and with the guidance of powerful figures like the philosopher Seneca and the Praetorian commander Burrus, the empire believed it might thrive under this unlikely ruler. But beneath the polished surface, something darker stirred. Nero was the son of Agrippina the Younger, the very woman believed to have poisoned Emperor Claudius to place her son on the throne. From the beginning, Agrippina ruled alongside Nero, whispering in his ear, shaping policy, and expecting total obedience. At first Nero allowed it, but as his confidence grew, so did his desire for independence and revenge. He began to resent his mother's control. Their relationship, once close, turned toxic. Whispers of plots, power struggles, and even incest haunted the imperial palace. And in 59 AD, just 5 years into his reign, Nero did the unthinkable. He had his mother murdered. It wasn't easy. The first attempt, a collapsible boat designed to drown her, failed when Agrippina swam to shore. Humiliated, Nero sent assassins to her villa under the cover of night. When they arrived, Agrippina is said to have uttered her final defiance. "Strike the womb that bore him." She was stabbed to death in her own bed. With her death, something in Nero broke. Freed from his mother's influence, he spiraled. He indulged in music, theater, chariot racing. He built lavish palaces while ignoring Rome's growing unrest. He banished or executed anyone who questioned him, including Seneca, his old tutor. He ruled not as a statesman, but as a performer, on the grandest stage in the world. And then came the fire. In 64 AD, a massive blaze swept through Rome. For 6 days, the city burned. Hundreds died, thousands were left homeless, and entire districts were reduced to ash. Rumors spread quickly. Many claimed Nero himself had started the fire so he could rebuild the city in his own vision. Some said he watched from a balcony playing the lyre and singing as Rome burned. Whether true or not, the damage to his image was irreversible. Needing a scapegoat, Nero found one in the Christians, a small, unpopular religious sect. He blamed them for the fire and ordered one of the most brutal persecutions in Roman history. Christians were crucified, burned alive, or torn apart by wild animals in public arenas. The bloodshed earned Nero the hatred of many, but it bought him a few more years on the throne. By now, paranoia ruled Nero's heart. He executed senators, nobles, and even family members. His popularity crumbled. Rebellions began to spark across the empire, in Gaul, Hispania, Africa. One by one, his allies abandoned him. Even the Praetorian Guard, once his shield, turned against him. In 68 AD, the Senate declared Nero a public enemy. Alone and panicked, Nero fled the city disguised as a servant. He took shelter in a villa outside Rome, surrounded by a handful of loyal freedmen. As horsemen approached to arrest him, Nero was faced with a choice: surrender and face a humiliating execution, or die on his own terms. He chose the latter. But Nero, the man who ordered so many deaths, couldn't bring himself to end his own life. In the end, it was one of his servants who helped him plunge a dagger into his throat. His final words, spoken in a trembling voice, were, "Qualis artifex pereo." What an artist dies in me. With that, the last of the Julio Claudian line was gone. His death didn't come with poison or a conspirator's dagger, but it was still an assassination, of reputation, of loyalty, and of imperial illusion. Nero had built a world of fear, and when that world collapsed, no one stood with him. Even the throne itself had rejected him. Nero's fall plunged Rome into chaos, the year of the 4 emperors, a time of civil war and rapid successions, each emperor rising and falling in bloody succession. His story became a symbol of tyranny, of madness, of what happened when a man lost touch with the reality of power. But more than that, it was a warning. In Rome, no amount of gold, no palace, no guard, no title could save an emperor from the people, or from himself. In the next part of our journey, we will follow the emperors who came after Nero, each trying to hold the empire together as it cracked and bled. But as we'll see, the cycle of betrayal would only grow sharper. Because in Rome, the empire didn't just assassinate men, it devoured them. When Nero drove a dagger into his own throat, he didn't just end his life, he shattered the illusion of stability. For over a century, the Julio-Claudian dynasty had ruled Rome, from Augustus to Nero. Now, for the first time, the empire had no heir, no direction, and no one to trust. What followed was a year so violent, so unstable, that it would be remembered in history simply as the year of the 4 emperors. 4 men would wear the purple. Each would claim the throne, and 3 would die trying to keep it. Galba, the old general, and his fatal mistake. When Nero died, power didn't pass through bloodlines, but through ambition. Enter Servius Sulpicius Galba, a 70-year-old governor of Hispania. He had the backing of the Senate and the support of the legions stationed far from Rome. Galba marched into the city not as a savior, but as a stern reformer. And Rome, desperate for order, accepted him. But Galba's first acts were not of unity, but of vengeance and thrift. He refused to pay the promised donatives, bribes essentially, to the soldiers who had helped secure his rule. Worse, he executed loyal commanders and insulted the Praetorian Guard. In a single stroke, he alienated the very people who had helped him ascend. And in Rome, when the emperor loses the soldiers, his days are numbered. In January of 69 AD, only 7 months into his reign, Galba was approached in the Forum by a group of soldiers. They claimed to escort him to safety. But once out of view, they struck. According to accounts, his head was cut off, his body left mutilated in the street. His severed head was paraded through Rome on a pike. The message was clear. Loyalty was a currency, and Galba had refused to pay Otho. The betrayer betrayed. His successor was Marcus Salvius Otho, a man who had once been a close ally of Nero. He had conspired in Galba's death and believed the throne would now be his. And it was for 3 brief months. But while Otho celebrated in Rome, a new threat was rising in the north. Vitellius, commander of the legions in Germania, had been declared emperor by his troops. He marched toward Italy with a massive force, and Otho, though untested in war, rushed to meet him. The 2 armies clashed at the Battle of Bedriacum. Otho's forces were defeated, and rather than plunge Rome into more civil war, he made a shocking decision. He took his own life. A rare moment of Roman honor. In a year soaked in betrayal, Otho's suicide was quiet, composed, and dignified. A far cry from Nero's melodramatic end. But his fall proved again how fleeting imperial power had become. The crown was no longer a symbol of divine right, but a prize to be taken by force. Vitellius. The glutton emperor and the rage of Rome now came Aulus Vitellius, a general of little discipline and less charm. He entered Rome in triumph, hosting banquets that lasted for days, and appointing friends and flatterers to high office. He was known more for his appetite than his leadership. Some accounts say he gorged himself so constantly that he vomited mid-meal just to continue eating. But while Vitellius celebrated, another threat loomed, this time from the east. Titus. Flavius Vespasianus, known as Vespasian, had been crushing a Jewish rebellion in Judea. A disciplined and pragmatic general, Vespasian had won the loyalty of the eastern legions. Now, he set his eyes on Rome. The legions declared him emperor, and his troops, battle-hardened and fierce, stormed Italy. Vitellius tried to resist, but Rome was tired of chaos. By the end of 69 AD, Vespasian's forces had entered the city. A brutal street battle unfolded. The capital burned, citizens fled. Blood ran through the alleyways of Rome. Vitellius was dragged from hiding, bound and paraded through the streets. The crowd hurled insults, garbage, and stones. At the foot of the Gemonian stairs, infamous for executions, he was beaten to death by soldiers. His corpse was thrown into the Tiber. 3 emperors dead in 1 year. All undone not by foreign enemies, but by Romans. Vespasian, a soldier who restored the empire. And then finally came Vespasian. The soldier. The realist. The survivor. He didn't enter Rome in glory, but in resolve. His goal was clear: restore order, rebuild the empire, and end the chaos. He was not of noble birth, nor descended from emperors. He was a self-made man, and the people respected him for it. Vespasian brought calm, stability. Taxes flowed again. The legions were paid, public works resumed, and he began the construction of a massive amphitheater that would become a symbol of Roman power for centuries, the Colosseum. But make no mistake, Vespasian ruled with steel beneath the surface. He understood better than anyone that power in Rome was fragile, and emperors did not die peacefully. The year of the 4 emperors left scars on the empire. It exposed the dark truth that had always haunted the throne. Without loyalty, without fear, without control, an emperor was only ever one sharp knife away from oblivion. And it set the stage for a new dynasty, the Flavian line, born not of blood, but of battlefield loyalty. But even that line would not be safe. Because as we'll see next, the cycle of betrayal was far from over. When Vespasian died in 79 AD, Rome was at peace. The scars of civil war had begun to fade. The empire had returned to stability, and the people had come to trust the Flavian dynasty. Into this fragile calm stepped his son, Titus. Titus Flavius, Caesar Vespasianus Augustus, a name heavy with expectation. He had proven himself long before becoming emperor. As a general, he had led the brutal campaign to crush the Jewish rebellion in Judea. He captured Jerusalem in 70 AD, destroyed the Second Temple, and paraded its treasures through the streets of Rome in a lavish triumph. The Arch of Titus still stands today as a monument to that conquest. But Titus wasn't just a warrior. He was cultured, intelligent, and, to the surprise of many, deeply humane. As emperor, he gained admiration almost immediately. He donated generously to disaster relief after Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying Pompeii and Herculaneum. He paid out of the imperial treasury to aid the victims, and when a massive fire swept through Rome, he again opened his personal wealth to rebuild the city. The people began to call him delight of the human race, a rare compliment in an era when most emperors ruled by fear, not love. But the golden light of his reign was brief, and it would not end naturally. Titus ruled for only 2 years. In 81 AD, while traveling outside Rome, he suddenly fell ill. Fever, chills, confusion. Within days, he was dead. Officially, the cause of death was natural, a fever, perhaps malaria. But many ancient historians weren't convinced, because Titus hadn't been traveling alone. At his side was his younger brother Domitian, a man with ambition, resentment, and a long history of waiting in the shadows. Suspicion in the imperial court. Domitian had always stood in his brother's shadow. While Titus was leading armies and earning the love of the people, Domitian remained in Rome, marginalized, underestimated. And yet, when Titus died, Domitian was miraculously prepared. Within hours, he declared himself emperor. The Senate hesitated, but the Praetorian Guard, ever the kingmakers, threw their support behind him. Titus hadn't even been buried yet, and Domitian was already seated on the throne. This immediate and total transfer of power sparked rumors that have lasted for centuries. Did Domitian poison his brother? Did he orchestrate the fever? Or did he simply take advantage of a tragedy? We may never know. But the speed and confidence with which he assumed power certainly darkened the mood. Even Suetonius, the imperial biographer, suggested that Titus had realized the truth on his deathbed. He reportedly looked up to the heavens and whispered, "I have made but one mistake." A cryptic statement, perhaps referring to trusting his brother. Whatever the cause, Titus was dead, and Domitian, the forgotten sibling, was now emperor. Sudden death for a popular emperor. Titus's death stood in sharp contrast to the emperors who came before him. He wasn't killed by rebels. He wasn't stabbed in the Senate. He didn't fall in battle, or to a crazed assassin. No, his end came quietly. Too quietly. A man at the height of his power, beloved by the people, suddenly extinguished like a candle in the night. To the Roman people, it felt wrong. Many mourned him as they would a lost son. Public ceremonies were held. Temples were dedicated in his name. And his brother, ironically, gave him divine honors. Perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of fear. The truth is, Titus was the kind of emperor Rome rarely got. Fair, noble, kind. And because of that, his sudden death stirred a chilling realization. Even the emperors who ruled wisely were not safe. Because in Rome, greatness could inspire admiration, but it also inspired envy. And the closer one got to the pinnacle of power, the sharper the daggers became. A new emperor, a new darkness. With Titus gone, Domitian ruled alone. And unlike his brother, he would not be loved. He ruled with iron control, paranoia, suspicion, executions. His reign would be long and terrifying. But we'll get to that. Because in our next chapter, we'll dive into Domitian's dark world, a reign defined by surveillance, purges, and betrayal. And eventually, a conspiracy so secretive, so well coordinated, that not even the emperor's guards could save him. The knives were being sharpened. He ruled in fear. He ruled through fear. And in the end, that fear became prophecy. This is the story of Domitian, the last emperor of the Flavian dynasty, a man who built walls around himself, both literally and emotionally. A man who trusted no one. A man who died alone, not on a battlefield, not before the Senate, but in the quiet of his own chambers, betrayed by the very people he thought he controlled. The rise of a shadow. When Domitian took the throne in 81 AD after the sudden death of his brother Titus, Rome held its breath. He had long been overlooked, even by his own family. But now, power was his. At first, it seemed he might rule wisely. He invested in public buildings, improved the economy, paid the legions on time, and cracked down on corruption. The empire expanded and prospered, but the longer he ruled, the darker things became. Domitian was intelligent, but paranoid, disciplined, but cruel. He insisted on being addressed as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. Statues of himself were erected across the empire. He demanded absolute obedience and saw treason everywhere, and when he saw treason, he crushed it. Senators were executed, often on vague charges. Trials were a formality. Informers thrived. Torture became a routine part of imperial justice. The Senate came to fear him. His court turned cold and silent, and even his closest allies learned to speak carefully. Or not at all. He ruled for 15 years. 15 long years in which Rome's outward stability masked a growing inner rot. And that rot was preparing to kill him. Whispers in the shadows by 96 AD. Domitian had made enemies of nearly every powerful group in Rome. The Senate, the aristocracy, the military, even members of his own household. His increasing paranoia led him to isolate himself. He moved through secret tunnels beneath the palace. He had mirrors polished to detect assassins from behind. He trusted no one, except a few. One of them was Parthenius, his chamberlain, the man who managed his day-to-day life inside the palace. The other was Stephanus, a freedman and personal servant. These men were in his private circle. They knew his habits, his moods, his daily routines. They also knew he wouldn't see it coming. The plot forms. It wasn't a grand conspiracy, not like Brutus and Cassius with Caesar. No, this was quiet, efficient. A knife slipped between ribs, not plunged in public. The conspirators were a mix of frustrated officials and frightened insiders. The key players were Parthenius, chamberlain of the palace; Stephanus, freedman who served as Domitian's secretary; Domitia Longina, the empress, possibly complicit; several members of the Praetorian Guard. Even some of Domitian's guards had turned on him. The emperor had alienated too many, punished too harshly, suspected too often. They didn't need a rebellion. They just needed an opening. The assassination. The date was September 18th, 96 A.D. Domitian awoke as usual and went about his morning, unaware that the countdown had already begun. Stephanus, one of the freedmen, approached him with a petition, a simple piece of paper, claiming to expose a plot. Domitian, already obsessed with treason, leaned in to read. But the paper was a distraction. Under his robes, Stephanus wore a hidden dagger, and as the emperor focused on the parchment, Stephanus struck. The first wound wasn't fatal. Domitian struggled. He tried to flee. He called for help, but help never came. His guards had been intentionally removed. The room had been emptied. The emperor, once surrounded by walls of steel and loyalty, was now alone. Other conspirators rushed in, several palace servants and soldiers. They stabbed him repeatedly, until he collapsed on the floor of his private chambers, bleeding out, on the marble. Just like that, the Lord and God was gone. The aftermath. Domitian was dead, but his death didn't spark celebration. It sparked confusion. He had no children, no clear successor. The Senate, long humiliated by his rule, rushed to erase him from memory. His name was condemned under the practice of damnatio memoriae, a total erasure from public record. Statues were smashed, inscriptions chiseled off. His name removed from monuments and records, but some remembered. The army mourned him. He had paid them well. The people of the provinces mourned too. He had ruled efficiently, if harshly. But in Rome's elite circles, there was relief. And quickly, very quickly, a new emperor was appointed. Nerva, an elderly senator with no children, seen as a safe transitional choice. But the message had been made brutally clear. Even the most paranoid emperor, even the emperor who built a fortress of fear, even the emperor who demanded to be called a god, could still bleed like a man. A pattern emerges. Domitian wasn't the first emperor to be stabbed in secret. He wouldn't be the last. But his story marked something important, a shift from chaotic civil war to surgical internal assassinations. The threats didn't always come from rebellious legions or angry mobs. Sometimes they came from the quiet man holding the scroll, the servant pouring the wine, the guard who looked away at just the right moment. In the next chapter, we'll witness the reign of a new kind of emperor, Trajan, and the era of the 5 good emperors. But don't be fooled by the title, because even in an age of reason, the shadow of betrayal never left the marble halls of Rome. When Domitian fell to the blade in 96 AD, Rome held its breath. The empire had grown tired of tyranny, paranoia, and blood-soaked politics. For the first time in decades, the Senate had a chance to choose. And they chose Nerva, an elderly, childless senator known for his moderation. But Nerva's rule was fragile, held together more by hope than strength. The legions were restless. The Praetorian Guard still burned with loyalty to Domitian. Riots broke out. The old man on the throne needed a savior, someone the army respected, someone with real power. That someone was Marcus Ulpius Traianus. History would remember him as Trajan, the first emperor born outside of Italy. A soldier, a statesman, a conqueror. And though his rule would be remembered as one of Rome's golden ages, there were whispers at the end. The rise of Rome's warrior King Trajan didn't seize the throne. It was handed to him. Nerva, recognizing that he could not control the empire alone, adopted Trajan as his heir. A political move meant to placate the army. It worked. When Nerva died peacefully in 98 AD, Trajan was already in command. He ruled for nearly 2 decades, a reign marked by expansion, stability, and massive public works. Trajan conquered Dacia, modern-day Romania, a rich land of gold, mines, and fierce warriors. He celebrated with one of the grandest monuments Rome ever built, Trajan's Column, spiraling upward with carved scenes of battle and triumph. He oversaw the construction of Trajan's Forum, Trajan's Market, and a new harbor at Ostia. The economy boomed, roads stretched across the empire, justice became more structured, taxes were fairer. Even the Senate, long bullied by emperors, found itself respected again. And Trajan was loved. He was hailed as Optimus Princeps, the best ruler. But in the shadows, a question lingered. If even the worst emperors had been assassinated, what of the best? The mysterious death of Trajan by 117 AD, Trajan had aged. He was still campaigning, this time deep in the east, fighting the Parthians. Victories came, but at great cost. The desert, the long marches, and the burden of rule had worn him down. And then, on the road back from war, Trajan suddenly fell ill. The official story was a stroke. He was taken to Selinus, a coastal town in Cilicia, modern-day Turkey. He lingered there for days, weakened, his speech slurred. And then, on August 8th, he died. The death was officially natural. But then came the strange part. His wife Plotina immediately announced that before dying, Trajan had adopted a new heir, Hadrian, a relative and a favorite of Plotina's. But no one had seen the adoption. There were no witnesses, no documents signed in public. Only Plotina's word. Hadrian had not even been present when Trajan died. He was back in Syria, hundreds of miles away. And yet, within days, he was declared emperor. The rumors started quickly. Did Plotina forge the adoption? Did she bribe the officials? Did she poison her own husband to raise her protege? We have no proof. Only silence. Only the speed with which the transition occurred. The smoothness of a death, followed instantly by a coronation. It was one of the most bloodless transfers of power in Roman history. And yet, the bloodlessness made it suspicious. Because in Rome, sudden peace was sometimes the quietest kind of murder. Hadrian, the adopted son, or the silent assassin. Hadrian mourned Trajan publicly. He declared a period of mourning. He ensured Trajan's ashes were returned to Rome and placed at the base of Trajan's Column, a rare honor. But Hadrian's first actions as emperor were chilling. Within months, he ordered the execution of 4 top Roman senators, men who had been close to Trajan. They were accused of conspiracy, of treason. But some whispered. These were the men who knew too much. They knew how Trajan really died. They knew whether the adoption was real or staged. And now, they were dead. Hadrian never spoke of them again. He ruled wisely, just like Trajan, and is today remembered as one of the 5 good emperors. He built Hadrian's Wall in Britain. He traveled across the empire, uniting distant provinces. He stabilized what Trajan had conquered. But the first days of his reign were washed clean, like a dagger wiped after the deed. The Golden Age was still made of steel. Trajan's death may have been natural, or not. In Rome, even the best rulers were never far from suspicion. Plots didn't always wear daggers. Sometimes they wore wedding rings, or walked the marble halls in silence. And while Trajan's reign marked the height of imperial greatness, Rome at its richest, strongest, and most admired, his death reminds us, even in a golden age, power changes hands in shadow. And what looks like a peaceful transition might simply be the perfect crime. In the next episode, we'll step into the reign of Hadrian, the restless traveler emperor, the builder of walls and bridges, and the man whose final days were haunted by a young death, a tragic love, and yet another suspicious imperial succession. Hadrian was different. Where Trajan was a conqueror, Hadrian was a consolidator. Where others expanded Rome's borders, he built walls to protect them. Where previous emperors ruled from Rome, he spent most of his reign on the move, walking the roads of his empire, one province at a time. He saw more of Rome than any emperor before or after, and Rome saw him in roads, in aqueducts, in marble, in ideas. He was not just an emperor. He was a philosopher king, a student of Greek culture, a lover of architecture, art, and poetry. But beneath the marble and the idealism, there was control, there was suspicion, there was grief, and there was a quiet, almost surgical cruelty, especially when it came to succession. Because Hadrian's final years would not be peaceful, they would be haunted by the death of a boy, the purge of the Senate, and one of the most mysterious imperial deaths Rome ever recorded. The traveling emperor. From the moment he took the purple in 117 AD, Hadrian set out, not to conquer, but to visit. He traveled across the empire: Gaul, Hispania, Britannia, Asia Minor, Greece, Judea, Egypt. Everywhere he went, he built. He debated with philosophers, laid out cities, sketched temples, gave lectures. In Britain, he ordered the construction of the most famous Roman wall in history, Hadrian's Wall, stretching 73 miles across the wild north. A visible message: here is Rome. Beyond is chaos. In Athens, he built libraries and gymnasiums. In Egypt, he sailed the Nile. He walked through markets unguarded. To many, Hadrian was a rare emperor who wanted to understand the people he ruled. But while the empire admired his mind, it could never quite understand his heart. Because Hadrian loved deeply, but not wisely. Antinous. The boy in the river in 123 AD, during his travels in Bithynia, modern-day Turkey, Hadrian met Antinous, a Greek youth of striking beauty. The emperor, in his late 40s, was instantly taken with him. What followed was a love that defied norms, whispered in marble, carved into temples, painted onto walls. Antinous traveled with Hadrian everywhere, inseparable, silent, worshipped. But in 130 AD, something happened. While sailing on the Nile, Antinous fell into the river and drowned. Hadrian was devastated, more than devastated, shattered. He halted the entire empire. He wept publicly. He built a city where the boy died, Antinopolis. He declared Antinous a god. Statues of the boy were erected across the empire. Coins bore his image. Temples were built in his name. But some whispered, did Antinous drown accidentally? Did he jump willingly? A ritual sacrifice to preserve the emperor's fading health? Or was he pushed? The truth never surfaced with his body. And Hadrian, from that moment on, began to change. Shadows of paranoia. The death of Antinous marked a shift. Hadrian withdrew. He grew colder, more suspicious. He returned to Rome and began making plans for monuments and for death. In 136 AD, his health was failing. He needed an heir. But he chose poorly. His first pick, Lucius alias Caesar, died suddenly, of a hemorrhage. A young, bright man with political promise, gone in a day. Was it illness? Maybe. But the pattern was beginning to repeat. Another heir, conveniently, removed. In 138 AD, Hadrian tried again. He adopted Antoninus Pius, a calm, respectable senator. But with a catch. Antoninus had to adopt 2 boys as part of the deal, Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. Why? Because Hadrian didn't just want an heir. He wanted a dynasty, one that he controlled, even from the grave. Antoninus agreed, the emperor who wouldn't die. As Hadrian's health worsened, his moods darkened. He withdrew to his vast villa in Tibur, a sprawling palace filled with Greek statues, bathhouses, and artificial lakes. But inside, the emperor was rotting. His organs failed. He vomited blood. He screamed at night, and still, he refused to die. The Senate grew restless. Hadrian had executed many of their colleagues years earlier. They wanted him gone. Even Antoninus was preparing to rule. But the old emperor clung to life, and clung to control. When Hadrian finally passed, it was not with dignity. His own letters described the agony. He begged for death. And yet, to this day, rumors persist. Was he eased into death? Did Antoninus, or someone close, poison or smother the emperor to end his suffering? And take power, we cannot know. But what we do know is this: Hadrian built his legacy like a monument, layer by layer, perfectly placed. And when it began to crack, through grief, through sickness, he tried to patch it with blood. The hidden cost of peace. Hadrian's reign is remembered as peaceful. There were no civil wars, few rebellions. Rome was rich, orderly, refined. But beneath the marble and the law, the empire's soul trembled. Hadrian was not assassinated by blade or betrayal, but his rule showed how power could kill without lifting a weapon. How love, grief, and paranoia could shape history just as much as steel. The emperor who built walls could not protect himself from loss. The man who traveled the world died surrounded by walls of his own making. The master of succession left behind a legacy haunted by uncertainty and sacrifice. In the next chapter, we'll meet Antoninus Pius, the calm emperor. But calm waters often hide deep undercurrents, and after him, a philosopher would wear the purple. And he would face not only war and plague, but the slow, suffocating death of his own son. Imagine this: you are the most powerful man on earth. You have wealth, armies, senators, scholars, all at your feet. But every night you write in a private journal, reminding yourself that power is fleeting, that death comes for all, that you must be just even when the world is cruel. You are Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, and you are about to make the worst mistake of your life. The philosopher on the throne, Marcus Aurelius, never wanted to rule. He wanted to study, to write, to reflect. From a young age he was drawn to the teachings of Stoicism, a philosophy of endurance, humility, and inner peace. But destiny had other plans. Hadrian had seen something in him, and by the time Marcus reached adulthood, he was adopted by Antoninus Pius, the quiet emperor who ruled for 23 peaceful years. When Antoninus died in 161 AD, Marcus became emperor. He immediately chose to share power with his adoptive brother Lucius Verus, something nearly unheard of in Rome. It was a gesture of humility, of fairness, and it wouldn't last. Plague, war, and fire. Marcus Aurelius's reign, often remembered as Rome's last great era of wisdom, was anything but peaceful. Barely a year into his rule, the Antonine plague swept through the empire, possibly smallpox or measles, killing millions. Lucius Verus succumbed to it. So did countless soldiers and citizens. Then came the wars. To the north, the Germanic tribes began crossing the Danube, threatening Roman borders. For over a decade, Marcus led his troops personally in bitter winter campaigns. While other emperors lounged in palaces, he lived with his soldiers, wrote philosophy in tents, and braved the cold and blood of war. He wrote down his thoughts in what we now call meditations, a quiet, humble reflection on how to live, rule, and die. But even as he fought for Rome, a darker battle was brewing back home. The son who would be emperor, Marcus Aurelius, had many children, but only one son survived into adulthood: Lucius Aurelius Commodus. From the beginning, Commodus was different. Where Marcus was serious and thoughtful, Commodus was spoiled and theatrical. He had no patience for philosophy, no stomach for hardship, and no respect for Rome's traditions. But Marcus loved him. And in one of the most debated decisions in all of Roman history, he named Commodus his heir. It broke a long tradition. For nearly 100 years, emperors had adopted capable successors, chosen not by blood, but by merit. Now, for the first time since Domitian, Rome would get a born son as emperor. The Senate was worried. The army was skeptical. Even Marcus's closest advisors questioned him, but he would not change his mind. When he fell ill in 180 AD during yet another military campaign, Marcus knew the end had come. His last words, according to legend, "Weep not for me. Think rather of the pestilence and the death of so many others." And with that, the last of the 5 good emperors, the Stoic philosopher who had guided Rome through plague, war, and unrest, closed his eyes and left the empire to a showman. The rise of a tyrant Commodus was 18 when he became sole emperor. At first, things were calm. He returned to Rome, made peace with the Senate, and honored his father. But it didn't last. Commodus had no interest in governing. He left the empire in the hands of corrupt favorites, Cleander, Perennis, and others who abused their power, sold offices, and murdered rivals. Meanwhile, Commodus entertained himself in the arena, dressing as Hercules, fighting in mock gladiator battles, and charging the Roman treasury for each staged victory. The people were amused, the Senate was horrified, and the assassins began to circle. Was Marcus Aurelius wrong? Why would a wise man like Marcus leave the empire to a boy like Commodus? Some historians suggest he had no choice. Others believe it was blind love. Still others argue he knew Commodus was flawed, but hoped the advisors would guide him. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear. Marcus Aurelius's greatest failure wasn't as a general or a philosopher. It was as a father, and that failure would haunt Rome for years to come. Because Commodus would survive multiple plots, he would grow more paranoid, more violent, until finally, one night, his enemies would strike. But that is a tale for Part 12. In the next episode, we'll plunge into the mad, bloody, and theatrical reign of Commodus, the emperor who thought he was a god, a gladiator, and Hercules reborn. He would fight beasts, stage battles, rename the city after himself, and die in the most humiliating way imaginable. Assassins, conspirators, strangulation in a bathtub. He thought he was a god. He dressed in lion skins, wielded a club, and claimed to be the reincarnation of Hercules himself. He fought in the arena like a gladiator. He renamed Rome after himself. He renamed the months after his titles. He even renamed the legions. He was the son of Marcus Aurelius. He was the end of the Golden Age. He was Commodus, and he was absolutely, completely insane. But as history would show, even gods can bleed, and sometimes they die gasping for air in a marble bathtub, at the hands of their closest allies. From emperor to entertainer, Commodus took the throne in 180 AD after the death of his father, Marcus Aurelius. At just 18, he inherited an empire held together by war, philosophy, and discipline, and he shattered it. He had no interest in governing. Instead, he surrounded himself with sycophants, freedmen, and palace favorites who fed his ego and drained the treasury. Rome's administration fell to men like Satirus, Perennis, and Cleander, each more corrupt than the last. But Commodus didn't care. He was busy rehearsing for the arena. He fought as a gladiator in front of cheering crowds, not just once, or twice, hundreds of times. Of course, His opponents were carefully arranged. No one dared touch him. It was performance, not combat. Still, he demanded payment as if he were a real champion. Charging the empire vast sums for each victory, he didn't just act like a god. He legislated it. He renamed Rome Colonia Commodiana. He declared himself Hercules Romanus. He had statues made of himself in heroic poses. He forced senators to worship him. Rome had seen tyrants before, but never like this. The city turns on its emperor. By 190 AD, the empire was in chaos. Famine gripped the streets. Corruption ran wild. Cleander, his chamberlain, sold government posts to the highest bidder. When riots broke out over food shortages, Cleander sent the Praetorian Guard into the streets, killing civilians en masse. The backlash was immediate. The people demanded blood, and in a rare moment of clarity, or fear, Commodus turned on his own advisor. He had Cleander executed, along with his family. But it wasn't mercy. It was damage control. Commodus ruled for another 2 years, growing more erratic, more paranoid. He carried a sword in the palace. He roamed at night, in gladiator gear. He ordered executions on a whim. He forced nobles to fight in the arena. Senators lived in fear. Generals kept their distance. His own lovers whispered behind closed doors. Something had to give. The final straw by 192 AD, Commodus announced his latest plan. On January 1st, the first day of the new year, he would appear in the arena not as emperor, but as gladiator. He would fight in front of the Roman people, not as a ruler, but as a spectacle. Then, he planned to inaugurate the year with a bloody festival, where he, now styling himself as God Emperor Gladiator, would begin a new era, ruled not by senators and tradition, but by him alone. To the Senate, it was unthinkable. To the palace, it was dangerous. That night, a conspiracy was born. The assassins assemble. The mastermind was Marcia, Commodus's mistress, a woman who had been loyal to him for years. But even she had limits. When she discovered her name, alongside the names of high-ranking senators and servants, on a secret execution list drawn up by Commodus, she knew it was time to act. She partnered with Eclectus, the chamberlain, and Latus, the commander of the Praetorian Guard. Together, they devised a simple plan. Poison his wine. Wait for him to weaken. Smother him in his bath before he could recover. On the evening of December 31st, 192 AD, Marcia brought Commodus his favorite drink, spiced wine, laced with poison. He drank it. He vomited. But he didn't die. Panic spread among the conspirators. They couldn't risk him recovering. They summoned a young wrestler, Narcissus, Commodus's personal trainer. He entered the emperor's bath. And there, surrounded by marble and steam, in the echoes of a palace that had once belonged to philosophers and gods, Commodus was strangled. The emperor who thought himself immortal died choking on his own delusions. The death of a god, when news spread. The next morning, Rome erupted with joy. The Senate declared Commodus a public enemy. They erased his name from monuments. They tore down his statues. The colony of Commodus once again became Rome, but the damage was done. His death ended the Nerva-Antonine dynasty. For nearly 100 years, Rome had been led by capable emperors, chosen for wisdom, not blood. Now chaos would return. Within weeks, Rome would fall into civil war. Multiple men would claim the throne. The year of the 5 emperors would begin, and all of it. Because a boy once born to a philosopher was allowed to rule like a god, the empire was falling apart. Commodus was dead, strangled in a bathtub, left sprawled in silence. The streets rejoiced. The Senate cheered. But beneath the celebration, a dark question loomed. Who rules now? There was no heir, no plan, no chosen successor. And into that vacuum stepped a man most Romans had never heard of, a man who had spent a lifetime in study, in service, and in silence. His name was Publius Helvius Pertinax. And for a brief, shining moment, he tried to bring the Roman Empire back from the edge. It almost worked. But then the Praetorian Guard came knocking. The scholar becomes emperor. Pertinax wasn't a general. He wasn't an aristocrat. He was the son of a freed slave, a school teacher, and a quiet administrator who had worked his way through the ranks with calm efficiency. Under Marcus Aurelius, he had served with honor. Under Commodus, he had survived by keeping his head down. So when Commodus was assassinated and Rome needed a safe replacement, the conspirators turned to Pertinax. He was wise, moderate, respected by the Senate, and, most importantly, he wasn't dangerous. They were wrong, because Pertinax, despite his quiet manner, had one dangerous idea. He wanted to fix Rome. A nation of spoiled wolves. Pertinax was crowned on January 1st, 193 AD. From day one, he moved fast. He reduced lavish palace spending. He tried to clean out corruption. He forced the Praetorian Guard to follow discipline. He auctioned off the luxuries of Commodus's court to stabilize the treasury. To the Senate and moral citizens, he was a godsend. To the Praetorians, he was a problem. Because for nearly a century, the Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers tasked with guarding the emperor, had become kingmakers. They took bribes. They lived like nobles. Under Commodus, they had been pampered. And Pertinax? He wanted to take their power away. Whispers in the barracks by March, just 3 months into his reign, discontent turned to fury. Pertinax had promised the guards a large donative, a customary bonus for supporting a new emperor. But the treasury was dry. He paid only half, and delayed the rest. To the Praetorians, this was treason. Behind closed doors, whispers began to spread. He's weak. He cheats us. He's no emperor, just an old schoolmaster with delusions of power. On the night of March 27th, 193 AD, nearly 300 guardsmen left their camp and marched silently toward the imperial palace. They weren't coming for a meeting. They came for blood. The final stand of Pertinax inside the palace. Pertinax was warned. He had time to flee, to hide, to escape through secret passages, but he didn't. The 66-year-old emperor stood his ground. According to the historian Dio Cassius, who was there in Rome at the time, Pertinax met the soldiers at the gate. He did not beg. He did not order. Instead, he spoke to them like a teacher to angry students. He reasoned. He pleaded with their sense of duty. He reminded them of the empire's stability, of Rome itself, and, for a moment, just a moment, they hesitated. Then someone yelled, and the mob rushed forward. 100 knives. The guards stormed the palace. They surrounded Pertinax. One soldier stabbed first, then another. Then they stabbed again, and again, and again. The emperor's blood soaked the marble. His guards, the ones loyal to him, were too few, too late. In the chaos, no one ordered the killing. No single man took credit. It was a murder by mob, spontaneous and feral. Afterward, the Praetorians paraded through the streets, boasting of their deed. They had just murdered a sitting emperor, and there would be no punishment. In fact, they had something to sell, the throne for sale. The next morning, with the emperor dead, the Praetorian Guard did something unthinkable. They auctioned off the Roman Empire. Standing on the walls of their camp, they announced to the Senate and public, "Whoever pays the highest donative shall be emperor." 2 men came forward. One was Titus Flavius Sulpicianus, the father-in-law of Pertinax. The other was a wealthy senator named Didius Julianus. They bid, openly, publicly, for the throne. Julianus offered the most, 25,000 sesterces per soldier, a massive fortune. The Praetorians cheered. He was crowned emperor that night. The crowd booed. The Senate? Horrified. Rome had just been sold like cattle, and the man who tried to stop the rot now lay cold in his blood. The price of reform Pertinax ruled for only 86 days, but in that time, he tried, truly tried, to bring back order, honesty, and discipline, and for that, he died. His death marked the start of the Year of the Five Emperors, a blood-soaked chapter in Roman history filled with betrayal, civil war, and more. Assassinations. Because after Julianus bought the throne, others came to take it back by force. Imagine this: you're dining in your lavish Roman villa, the candles flicker, the servants pour wine. Your family is laughing, the music is soft. Then a messenger arrives, breathless. The emperor is dead, the throne is up for sale, the bidding starts now. Most people would laugh. You don't, because you're Didius Julianus, one of the richest men in Rome, a senator, a man with ambition, and no army. But ambition can be louder than common sense. And tonight you're about to buy the Roman Empire, like a man buying a loaf of bread. This is the story of how power was auctioned, bought, and beheaded in a single doomed reign. The death of Pertinax, the fall of honor when Pertinax was murdered by the Praetorian Guard after just 86 days as emperor. Rome was shaken, but not surprised. The guards, drunk with power, knew no one could stop them, so they took it a step further. They opened the gates of their camp and put the empire up for auction. Yes, literally. From the ramparts, the Praetorians shouted, "The empire to the man who pays the highest donative." Two men stepped up. Sulpicianus, Pertinax's father-in-law, Didius Julianus, who wasn't even involved in politics that week, but saw an opportunity. The two men began to bid 1,000 sesterces per soldier, then 30,000, and then Julianus promised more than the treasury even held. The guards didn't care. They cheered. That night, Didius Julianus was marched into the Senate house. He had no army, no reputation, no support, but he had the crown, the emperor. No one wanted. From the moment he took the throne, it was clear. Julianus was doomed. The Roman people despised him. They gathered outside the palace and screamed insults. They threw stones. They called for his death. The Senate obeyed out of fear, but whispered in private. No general backed him. No governor supported him. And far to the east, one man saw his moment. Lucius Septimius Severus, a battle-hardened general from Africa, commanding the powerful legions of Pannonia. When word reached Severus of Pertinax's death, he didn't wait. He marched west with 20,000 soldiers. Not to bid, not to negotiate, but to take. Panic in the palace back in Rome. Julianus heard the news. Severus was coming. Fast. He tried everything to stay alive. He sent envoys offering co-rule. He promised bribes to the approaching army. He prayed, begged, and even tried to call Severus son. It didn't work. The people opened the gates. The Senate flipped loyalty. The Praetorian Guard, those very men who had sold him the throne, now refused to fight. Julianus stood alone in the palace, wrapped in purple robes, staring at doors that would not hold. A quiet execution on June 1st, 193 AD, just 66 days after buying the empire. Julianus was sentenced to death by the Senate. The guards, now loyal to Severus, entered the palace. Julianus reportedly asked them, "But what wrong have I done? Whom have I killed?" The reply? Silence. They took him to a quiet room. There, in the stillness, they beheaded him. He had bought the empire like a commodity, and now it treated him like one. Discarded, erased, and forgotten. Severus takes the throne days later. Septimius Severus entered Rome as a conqueror. He did not ask for Senate approval. He did not negotiate with the Praetorian Guard. He disbanded them entirely, declared them traitors, and replaced them with his own loyal soldiers. He took the purple not as a politician, but as a general. He would rule for 18 years, through war, blood, and sheer will. But that is for another time. The price of power. Julianus's story is unlike any other in Roman history. He didn't win battles. He didn't seize power through force. He didn't inspire the people or Senate. He simply bought the throne, and found out what happens when no one believes you deserve it. He ruled for just over 2 months. He died alone, and his name would become a punchline in Roman history. But what followed, under Severus, would be no less bloody. Civil war, ruthless purges, a dynasty that would rise on violence, not virtue. He marched into Rome like a conqueror, not as a savior, not as a philosopher, but as a general in command of 20,000 loyal soldiers. He did not ask for the Senate's blessing. He took it. He did not beg the Praetorian Guard for loyalty. He dissolved them. This was Septimius Severus, the man who ended the year of the 5 emperors, and began an empire ruled by the military. But behind the marble statues and golden laurel wreaths, Severus's reign was built on vengeance. He didn't just defeat his enemies. He chased them into the grave, dug up their memories, and destroyed their names. His reign would bring stability, but at a cost. Because when a man becomes emperor through blood, he learns to rule with it. A general from the edges of Empire, Severus wasn't Roman in the traditional sense. He was born in Leptis Magna, in modern-day Libya, a Punic-speaking province with strong Carthaginian roots, a man of mixed ancestry, sharp mind, and even sharper ambition. By the time Commodus died, Severus was already a respected military commander. While others debated, he acted. When Pertinax was murdered and Julianus bought the throne, Severus made one decision: I will be emperor, or I will be dead. He didn't wait for support. He declared himself emperor, rallied the legions of the Danube, and marched on Rome. Julianus never stood a chance. Dismantling the old guard once in power, Severus knew what had to be done. First, he turned on the Praetorian Guard, the same soldiers who murdered Pertinax and auctioned off the empire. He stripped them of their armor, disbanded their units, banished them from the city. Then, he replaced them with his own soldiers, veterans from the Danubian legions, men who had fought under him, men who owed him everything. He didn't just seize power, he rewired the empire to keep it. Vengeance from beyond the grave. Severus may have defeated Julianus, but 2 other claimants still remained. Pescennius Niger, governor of Syria, who had also declared himself emperor. Clodius Albinus, governor of Britain, who initially allied with Severus but eyed the throne for himself. These weren't senators. They were generals, and in a world now ruled by the sword, that made them dangerous. So Severus did what he always did: marched. He crushed Niger in the east, defeating his forces near Byzantium. He turned west and annihilated Albinus in Gaul, at the bloody Battle of Lugdunum, one of the deadliest civil battles in Roman history. But Severus wasn't done. He executed Niger's allies. He had Albinus's body displayed, his head sent back to Rome. Then he hunted down their families, their supporters, even their memories. Statues were destroyed, names erased from inscriptions, properties seized. This wasn't just politics, it was purging history. Rule through fear. Severus's reign was defined by brutal efficiency. He doubled the pay of soldiers. He restructured the provinces to weaken senatorial control. He strengthened frontier defenses, especially in the east. But most of all, he made it clear: if you threaten the emperor, even in word, even in death, I will find you. It wasn't paranoia. It was policy. Even senators who had merely written letters to Niger or Albinus were tried for treason. Many were executed. Others vanished quietly. Severus ruled for 18 years, the longest since Marcus Aurelius, but no one forgot how he had come to power or what happened to those who stood in his way. Death in distant lands in 208 AD, already aging and ill, Severus launched a campaign in Britannia, determined to subdue the north and secure the frontier one last time. But the land was harsh, the enemy elusive, and Severus was dying. He knew it. On his deathbed in Eboracum, modern-day York, he summoned his sons, Caracalla and Geta, and gave one final command: live in harmony, enrich the soldiers, and despise everyone else. It was a bitter legacy, a final lesson. Trust only the army, kill before you are killed. Then, he died, quietly, in a cold foreign land, far from Rome, far from his birthplace, but still emperor to the end. Legacy in blood. Septimius Severus left behind a dynasty, but it was born in blood. His son Caracalla would inherit the throne and take his father's lessons to terrifying extremes. Assassination would return. Brotherhood would turn to murder. And the empire would tremble. Again, he stood over the body of his brother. Still warm. Still breathing. Their mother screamed. He didn't flinch. He ordered the guards. Finish it. This is the story of Caracalla, son of Septimius Severus, an emperor forged in war and broken by paranoia. He ruled through blood, conquered in his father's name, and declared himself a god. But in the end, it wasn't a general or a senator who killed him. It was a bodyguard, with a grudge. Let's dive into one of the most brutal and personal assassinations of the Roman Empire. A family at war. When Severus died in 211 AD, he left the empire to his two sons, Caracalla, real name, Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. Geta, the younger, quieter brother. Severus's final wish was clear: live in harmony. But the moment the old emperor's body turned cold, harmony was off the table. Caracalla and Geta hated each other. Deeply, violently. They had fought since childhood, over power, over attention, over destiny. And now they had to share an empire? Not a chance. They divided the palace. Separate guards, separate rooms. They spoke through mediators, like enemy kings under one roof. But Caracalla wasn't just angry. He was dangerous. Fratricide in the palace in December of 211, just months after Severus's death. Caracalla invited Geta to a meeting, supposedly to make peace, with their mother Julia Domna as a witness. Geta agreed. He arrived unarmed. When he entered the chamber, Caracalla's men attacked. They stabbed him in the chest, in the back, in the throat. Blood splattered the marble floor. Their mother, standing between them, was covered in her son's blood. Screaming for mercy, Caracalla watched it all, then ordered, "Erase him." And that's exactly what happened. Damnatio memoriae. Death after death. Caracalla launched a damnatio memoriae against his own brother. The Roman ritual of erasing someone's memory from history. Geta's name was scratched off every monument. His face chiseled out of statues and paintings. Coins bearing his image were melted down. Even mentioning his name became punishable by death. Over 20,000 people, including friends, servants, and officials suspected of favoring Geta, were executed. It was not just murder. It was obliteration. Caracalla was now sole ruler of Rome. Tyrant in the east, with no one left to challenge him at home, Caracalla turned outward. He declared himself Alexander the Great reborn, launched a massive campaign against Parthia-built monuments to his power, including the massive baths of Caracalla, passed the Constitutio Antoniniana, granting Roman citizenship to nearly all free men in the empire, partly to increase tax revenue, but under the surface, he was cracking. He heard whispers everywhere. He executed senators without trial. He traveled constantly, fleeing the ghosts of Rome and the memory of his brother. And then, in 217 AD, while en route to Parthia, he met a man he had insulted one too many times. The road to assassination Caracalla was traveling through Mesopotamia, heading toward Carrhae. He stopped his escort to urinate by the roadside. An unguarded moment, rare for any emperor. Suddenly, one of his own bodyguards, Julius Martialis, stepped forward. Martialis had a personal vendetta. Some say Caracalla had mocked his rank. Others say he had executed Martialis's brother. Whatever the cause, the result was simple. One quick thrust of the dagger, straight into Caracalla's lower back or stomach. The emperor collapsed, writhing, dying in his own blood and urine. His guards killed Martialis immediately. But it was too late. The emperor was dead. The legacy of Blood Caracalla ruled for 6 years. He murdered his brother, terrorized the Senate. He saw himself as a god and died like a man. His death left a power vacuum once again. But this time, the killer wasn't a rival general or political mastermind. It was a simple soldier, pushed too far, and the man who replaced Caracalla, Macrinus, the very Praetorian prefect who had likely orchestrated the assassination behind the scenes. For the first time in Roman history, a man not of senatorial or noble birth would sit on the throne. But Macrinus's reign wouldn't last long, because from the shadows, a teenage boy with a divine name was being groomed, one who claimed to be the cousin of Caracalla, and the son of a god. He was crowned with gold, dressed in silk, worshipped as a god, and murdered like an animal. This is the story of Elagabalus, the teenage emperor who tried to turn Rome into a temple, himself into a living deity, and the empire into something unrecognizable. He ruled not by the sword, but by scandal. And when Rome had enough, it didn't just kill him, it erased him. A god from the east, Elagabalus, wasn't his real name. He was born Varius Avitus Bassianus in 203 AD in Emesa, modern-day Homs, Syria. There, his family were hereditary high priests of the sun god Elagabal, a black stone deity worshipped in Emesa. From a young age, Varius was raised not as a Roman, but as a living priest-king, performing sacrifices, wearing golden robes, and ruling through divine aura. But far away in Rome, the emperor Caracalla was dead, and the boy's mother, Julia Soaemius, saw a chance. A teenage coup. Julia Soaemius was niece to Julia Domna, wife of Septimius Severus, and mother of Caracalla. That meant Varius could claim to be Caracalla's cousin. It was a lie, but a useful one. With the help of her formidable mother, Julia Maesa, and the loyalty of Eastern legions, the women staged a coup against Emperor Macrinus. It worked. Macrinus was defeated in battle, beheaded, and his son executed. The Senate, powerless as always, declared Elagabalus emperor, at just 14 years old. But what Rome got wasn't a warrior. It was a god in flesh, or so he claimed. Worship me. Rome. Elagabalus didn't try to act Roman. He tried to make Rome act like Emesa. He imported the black stone of Elagabal to Rome and built a lavish new temple, the Elagabalium, on the Palatine Hill. He forced the Senate to attend his Eastern religious ceremonies. He paraded sacred relics through the streets. He married a Vestal virgin, breaking one of Rome's oldest and most sacred laws. To him, religion wasn't tradition, it was performance, and he was the star, the emperor of scandal. But it wasn't just religion. Elagabalus's behavior shocked Rome to its core. He dressed in silk and makeup, often appearing in public as a woman. He allegedly prostituted himself in the imperial palace. He married multiple women, and possibly men, including a charioteer named Heracles, whom he called his husband. He asked physicians if it were possible to surgically become a woman, the first recorded instance of gender reassignment inquiry in Roman history. To modern ears, these may sound like questions of identity, but in Roman eyes, it was blasphemy, madness, and chaos at the heart of the state. Worse, Elagabalus ignored politics, mocked the military, and insulted the Senate. Powerful men began to whisper, and Julia Maesa, the same grandmother who put him on the throne, started to worry. The shadow of Severus Maesa knew the empire couldn't survive her grandson's rule. So she turned to a safer bet. Elagabalus's cousin, Severus Alexander, a quiet, well-behaved teenager whom the Praetorian Guard liked, she pushed for a co-emperorship. Elagabalus, furious and paranoid, tried to strip Alexander of his titles, but it was too late. The Guard had made their choice. Death in the barracks in March 222. A.D. Elagabalus and his mother visited the Praetorian camp, suspecting growing disloyalty. There, the soldiers turned. They attacked him and his mother in broad daylight. Elagabalus ran, hid, screamed. But the soldiers dragged him from a corner of the barracks, stabbed him repeatedly, and cut off his genitals, a mocking rejection of his identity and power. They murdered his mother, too. Then, in an act of pure hatred, they dragged both corpses through the streets, threw them in the Tiber River, or, in some accounts, down the sewer. That's how Elagabalus, priest, emperor, boy, was erased. Erased, but not forgotten. After his death, the Senate declared a damnatio memoriae. His portraits were smashed, his name removed from public inscriptions, his religious reforms reversed. Rome tried to forget. But centuries later, historians, both ancient and modern, would dig him back up. To some, he was a monster. To others, a queer icon ahead of his time. To all, he was unlike any emperor Rome had ever seen. His cousin, Severus Alexander, would now rule under the shadow of scandal, trying to bring order after madness. But peace doesn't last long in Rome. He was young, he was inexperienced, but he tried to be different. Severus Alexander was the last emperor of the Severan dynasty, a man caught between the madness of the past and the storm looming over Rome's future. He sought peace. He sought stability. But Rome's army demanded blood, and when he refused to wage war, his soldiers turned on him, stabbing him in the back, quite literally. The rise of a reluctant Emperor Severus. Alexander became emperor at just 14 years old, after the assassination of his flamboyant cousin Elagabalus. Guided by his mother Julia Mamaea, he was raised to rule wisely and cautiously. Unlike Elagabalus, Alexander tried to restore traditional Roman values and stabilize the empire. He respected the Senate. He tried to placate the military. He avoided unnecessary wars. But the Roman legions were restless. They demanded glory, spoils, and conquest. Peace or death. In 235 AD, the empire faced threats on multiple fronts. Germanic tribes pushing into the Rhine frontier, the Sassanid Empire pressing in the east. Severus Alexander planned to handle these challenges diplomatically. He sent envoys. He negotiated. He avoided battles. But the legions, trained to fight and win, saw this as weakness. In the eyes of the soldiers, their emperor was failing them. Betrayal at Moguntiacum, while stationed near the Rhine, the troops grew restless and mutinous. Rumors spread that the emperor's commanders were incompetent and timid. The soldiers' patience snapped. In March 235 AD, near Moguntiacum, modern Mainz, Germany, Severus Alexander and his mother were assassinated by their own troops. The soldiers stabbed Alexander multiple times. His mother, Julia Mamaea, was killed alongside him. The empire lost its last Severan emperor, not on the battlefield, but in a brutal act of betrayal. The aftermath. A new era begins. Severus. Alexander's death marked the beginning of the crisis of the 3rd century, a period of military anarchy, civil wars, and rapid turnover of emperors. His assassin, Maximinus Thrax, was proclaimed emperor by the troops, starting a brutal reign of soldier kings. Rome entered a chaotic era where the throne was won and lost by the sword, and assassination became the norm. Legacy of Severus. Alexander. Severus Alexander was a man caught between ideals and reality. He tried to rule with reason and restraint. But in a Rome where soldiers demanded blood and power was fragile, such virtues could not survive. His assassination was a grim reminder. In the Roman Empire, the emperor's greatest threat was often not a rival, but the very army sworn to protect him. He was a giant among men, a barbarian by birth, a soldier by trade, and an emperor by force. Maximinus Thrax rose from the mud and blood of the frontier legions to claim the throne of Rome. But in the end, his own soldiers turned their blades against him. Born of the barbarians. Maximinus was born around 173 AD in Thrace, a wild and rugged region along the northern borders of the Roman Empire. Unlike the refined and often decadent aristocrats who traditionally filled the imperial throne, Maximinus was a man of raw physical power and soldierly toughness. Some sources say he stood over 8 feet tall, a giant in a land of men. His shoulders were broad enough to carry the weight of an empire, but also to bear the scorn of Rome's elite. His origins were humble. His family were not senators or patricians, but common folk, likely Thracian peasants or soldiers themselves. He enlisted in the Roman legions and served with distinction in the border wars, earning a reputation for brutal efficiency and relentless energy. He was a man who knew only discipline and war. The empire in crisis. By the time Maximinus came to power, the Roman Empire was already on the edge of collapse. After the assassination of Severus Alexander in 235 AD, Rome entered the infamous crisis of the 3rd century, a chaotic period of nearly 50 years marked by civil wars, external invasions, economic turmoil, and political instability. The army was king. Emperors rose and fell based on their ability to command loyalty from their legions. The Senate, once the heart of Roman power, had been reduced to a powerless body that often chose emperors under pressure from the military. It was in this environment that Maximinus was proclaimed emperor by the troops. His popularity among soldiers was unmatched. He was one of their own, a hardened warrior who promised victory and strength in the face of barbarian threats. A brutal reign. Maximinus ruled from 235 to 238 AD, a short but savage reign. He was focused on military campaigns, especially against the Germanic tribes along the Rhine and Danube frontiers. His campaigns were bloody and effective, but they drained the empire's coffers and exhausted its people. To fund the army and keep his legions loyal, Maximinus imposed heavy taxes, particularly targeting the wealthy aristocracy and senators. His disdain for the Senate was clear. He treated the senators as corrupt and useless, and he often bypassed them in his decisions. Public executions and purges were common under his rule. Maximinus did not tolerate dissent. His reign was one of fear and oppression, but also of military might. The Senate's revolt and the year of the 6 emperors. The Senate's patience finally snapped in 238 AD, known as the Year of the 6 Emperors, a year of rapid imperial turnovers and civil war. Senators declared 2 rival emperors, Gordian I and Gordian II, in opposition to Maximinus. Although Gordian I and the II's rebellion was quickly crushed, it sparked wider resistance. The Senate declared Maximinus an enemy of the state, and Rome descended into chaos. Maximinus marched his army toward Rome to crush the rebellion personally, but the loyalty of his troops began to falter. The harsh conditions of the march, the constant fighting, and Maximinus's own cruelty wore down even his most loyal soldiers. Assassination on the march. Maximinus approached the city of Aquileia. His army camped nearby and faced a harsh winter, supply shortages, and growing discontent. The soldiers, once loyal to their giant emperor, now saw him as a liability. In 238 AD, amid this tension and frustration, the legions mutinied. They turned on Maximinus, stabbing him repeatedly in the camp. Some say his head was cut off and sent to Rome as a symbol of the end of his reign. The assassination of Maximinus Thrax was violent and sudden, a grim reminder of how quickly fortune could turn in the Roman army. What Maximinus's death meant. Maximinus's death marked a turning point in Roman history. He was the first emperor to come from the ranks of common soldiers rather than the aristocracy, signaling a new era where military power dictated the throne. His brutal, short reign exemplified the dangers Rome faced during the crisis of the 3rd century, where loyalty was fragile, and the throne was a prize won or lost on the battlefield, or by the dagger in the back. His demise plunged the empire further into instability, setting the stage for decades of civil wars and assassinations. Conclusion: Maximinus Thrax was a man of contradictions. A towering soldier who commanded respect and fear, but lacked political finesse or mercy. He rose from the ranks to the highest seat of power, but was quickly cut down by those who once followed him. His story is a brutal chapter in the saga of Rome's emperors, a stark reminder that in the empire's later years, strength alone could not secure the throne. Only the loyalty of the army, which was as unpredictable as the fate of Rome itself. Imagine being crowned emperor at just 13 years old. No experience, no military training, no real political power. Only the heavy burden of an empire on your young shoulders. This was the fate of Gordian III, one of the youngest emperors in Roman history. His reign promised a glimmer of hope during one of the darkest periods Rome ever faced, the crisis of the 3rd century. But his story ended in shadow, with a mysterious death that some say was murder, and others blame on the brutal realities of war. A youth thrust into power, Gordian III was born in 225 AD into a prestigious family connected to the imperial line. His grandfather, Gordian I, and uncle, Gordian II, had briefly ruled as emperors during a tumultuous year marked by rapid changes of power. The infamous Year of the Six Emperors in 238 AD. After the violent deaths of previous rulers and the reign of Maximinus Thrax, the Senate and military sought a new figure to unite the fracturing empire. The choice fell on young Gordian III. At the tender age of 13, he was declared emperor by the Senate. His youth made him a symbol of renewal and stability, but it also rendered him vulnerable. He had no true experience to wield power. Instead, he was surrounded by ambitious generals and political factions eager to control the throne through him. The empire in turmoil. Rome was no stranger to chaos at this time. The empire faced multiple threats from inside and out: civil wars, economic collapse, and foreign invasions. The Persian Sassanid Empire was pressing hard on the eastern frontiers, threatening the vital provinces of Mesopotamia and Syria. Despite his youth, Gordian III's name was enough to rally some semblance of loyalty among the Senate and army, at least for a time. But real leadership came from those who guided him. Most notably, the powerful Praetorian prefect Timesitheus, a seasoned general and statesman who became Gordian's chief advisor. Campaign against the Persians in 242 AD. With Timesitheus at his side, Gordian III launched a major campaign against the Sassanid Persians. The initial Roman advance was promising. Timesitheus's military skill helped secure some victories and boosted morale. Gordian, while young, accompanied the army, symbolizing imperial presence on the frontier. He witnessed firsthand the brutal realities of warfare, but real command remained with Timesitheus. However, the campaign's momentum faltered when Timesitheus suddenly died in 243 AD. Ancient sources are unclear about his death. Some claim illness, while others suggest assassination. Without this crucial leader, the Roman forces lost direction and confidence. The mysterious death at Misish. The campaign reached a disastrous turning point near the city of Misish in modern-day Iraq. Faced with an aggressive Persian army led by King Shapur I, the Roman legions suffered a severe defeat. Gordian III died during this campaign in 244 AD, but the exact circumstances remain shrouded in mystery. Some ancient historians claim he was killed in battle, falling alongside his soldiers defending the empire's honor. Others whisper darker tales, that Gordian was murdered by his own commanders, perhaps as part of a plot to seize power. One popular theory suggests that Philip the Arab, a powerful senator and general who became Gordian's successor, may have orchestrated the assassination to claim the throne. Philip the Arab's rise to power. Shortly after Gordian's death, Philip the Arab was proclaimed emperor by the army. He was the first Roman emperor of Arab descent and promised peace and reform, but his reign too ended violently. Whether or not Philip had a hand in Gordian's death remains an open question. But the pattern of betrayal and murder was sadly typical in this era. Legacy of Gordian III. Gordian III's reign was brief, but significant. He embodied the hope of a fractured empire yearning for stability. Yet, as a boy emperor caught in a deadly game of politics and war, his life and death reveal the brutal truth of imperial Rome. That power was as fragile as a flame in a storm. His mysterious and tragic end serves as a haunting chapter in the saga of Roman emperors who faced betrayal, assassination, and the relentless dangers of ruling an empire on the brink of collapse. Imagine rising from the ranks of the Roman Senate to the highest seat of power, the imperial throne. Such was the path of Philip the Arab, a man whose life reflected both the opportunities and deadly pitfalls of ruling Rome during the crisis of the 3rd century. Yet, despite his political skill and relative popularity, Philip's reign ended violently, a stark reminder that no emperor, no matter how clever, was safe from betrayal and assassination. The rise of Philip the Arab. Philip, born as Marcus Julius Philippus around 214 AD in the Roman province of Arabia Petraea, modern-day Syria and Jordan, was not of traditional aristocratic Roman lineage. He was, however, a skilled politician and soldier who climbed the imperial ladder through competence and military command. Philip first entered the political scene as a senator under the Emperor Gordian III. He held important military commands, and his influence grew steadily. When Gordian III died under mysterious circumstances during the Persian campaign of 244 AD, Philip was in a prime position to seize power. The army proclaimed him emperor, marking a rare instance of a senator becoming emperor in an era dominated by soldier emperors. A reign marked by hope and challenges. Philip the Arab's reign, from 244 to 249 AD, began with cautious optimism, promised to restore peace within the empire and improve relations with the Senate. A stark contrast to his predecessor, Maximinus Thrax's brutal military rule. Philip negotiated peace with the Persian Empire, ending hostilities that had drained Roman resources. He also celebrated Rome's 1000th anniversary in 248 AD with grand games and public festivities, aiming to legitimize his reign and rally popular support. Political intrigues and growing threats. Despite these efforts, Philip's rule was fraught with dangers. The empire was still rife with internal rebellions, economic problems, and external threats from Germanic tribes along the Danube. More ominously, a rival general named Decius gained prominence in the army. Decius was proclaimed emperor by his troops in 249 AD, sparking a civil war against Philip. The battle that sealed Philip's fate. In 249 AD, Philip faced Decius in battle near Verona, in northern Italy. The conflict was brutal and decisive. Philip's forces were defeated, and the emperor fled the battlefield. Ancient sources tell us that Philip was killed soon after, either in battle or assassinated by his own men desperate to switch allegiance. His death ended his 5-year reign and plunged the empire further into chaos. The legacy of Philip, the Arab Philip. The Arab story highlights the deadly game of survival that Roman emperors faced during the crisis of the 3rd century. He tried to balance military strength, political savvy, and public support. But ultimately the shifting loyalties of the army decided his fate. His reign, though relatively stable compared to others, was just another chapter in Rome's ongoing saga of violent power struggles. Conclusion. Philip's violent end serves as a grim reminder that even those who rose through the Senate, who sought peace and legitimacy, were not immune to the empire's brutal cycle of betrayal and assassination. As Rome staggered through decades of crisis, the throne remained a perilous seat, coveted but deadly. The story of Decius is the story of Rome's desperate struggle to survive in the 3rd century. A soldier emperor, a man of humble origins who rose to power through the legions, Decius ruled for a short but intense time, only to meet a violent end on a foreign battlefield. His death marked the continuation of the tragic cycle of assassination and military disaster that defined the Roman Empire's crisis of the 3rd century. From soldier to emperor, Gaius Messius Quintus Decius, known simply as Decius, was born around 201 AD in the province of Pannonia, modern-day Hungary and Serbia, a region that produced many soldiers and emperors. Like many of his peers, Decius rose through the military ranks, proving himself a capable and ambitious commander. He served under Emperor Philip the Arab and was popular with the legions. In 249 AD, sensing Philip's weakening hold on power and fueled by growing dissatisfaction within the army, Decius was proclaimed emperor by his troops. The challenge of civil war. Decius's claim to the throne sparked a civil war. He marched his army into Italy to confront Philip. The decisive battle took place near Verona. Philip's forces were defeated, and Philip himself was killed, clearing the way for Decius to take the throne. But winning the crown was only the beginning of Decius's challenges. Reign. Amidst crisis, Decius ruled from 249 to 251 AD during one of Rome's most turbulent eras. His reign was marked by continuous threats, invasions from Gothic tribes in the north, economic decline, and internal political instability. Decius was a soldier at heart, and his main focus was restoring order and defending the empire's borders. But he is perhaps best remembered for his harsh persecution of Christians, seeking to unify the empire through religious conformity, a policy that cost him both allies and popularity. The fatal Battle of Abritus, the defining and tragic moment of Decius' reign, came in 251 AD. The Gothic tribes had crossed the Danube, threatening Roman provinces. Decius marched north to confront the invaders in what would become the Battle of Abritus in modern Bulgaria. The battle was brutal and catastrophic for Rome. In a rare event for a Roman emperor, Decius died in combat, alongside his soldiers, the first Roman emperor to be killed in battle against a foreign enemy in over a century. His death shocked the empire and marked another devastating blow in its ongoing crisis. What Decius's death meant for Rome. Decius's death left the empire vulnerable. The Goths looted Roman lands, and the imperial throne became the prize of whoever could command the army. His son, Herennius Etruscus, who co-ruled with him, also died in the battle, showing the personal cost of imperial power. The empire's cycle of rapid successions, assassinations, and civil wars continued. The final reflections on the age of assassinated emperors. The stories of emperors like Maximinus Thrax, Gordian III, Philip the Arab, and Decius reveal a Roman Empire in chaos. Each emperor's assassination or violent death was a symptom of deeper problems: political instability, military overreach, economic troubles, and the fracturing of loyalty. These assassinations were not isolated events, but part of a relentless storm tearing at the very fabric of Roman society. Yet in each story, we see human ambition, courage, betrayal, and tragedy, the timeless elements that make history so gripping. Conclusion. The price of power in imperial Rome. The assassination of Roman emperors was not just a series of gruesome episodes. It was the consequence of an empire struggling to survive amid pressure from within and without. The imperial throne, shining with the glory of Rome, was also a seat of peril. For every man who wore the purple, there was always a dagger waiting. From rivals, from soldiers, from the very people meant to serve and protect the empire. This brutal cycle would continue until the eventual reforms of the late empire and the rise of new political structures that sought, at last, to stabilize Rome's legacy. Thank you for joining this deep dive into the violent and turbulent lives of Rome's assassinated emperors. Theirs are stories of power, betrayal, and the ultimate price paid for the crown.